evening. From the Scrutiny Commission, which is. My name is Councillor Margaret Ewins. I am the start. I have take. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening, so if you hear the fire alarm, nearest fire exit, make your way to the agreed assembly John's Churchyard. Council security staff available. Public toilets are located off the main reception. Please switch your mobile phone to silent whilst in. This meeting is being live streamed to YouTube channel via the platform. The recording of the meeting will also be viewable on YouTube after the meeting. May I remind members to raise your hand, speak, and wait until permission to speak. Members of the public are welcome to screenshot or tweet the public. A copy of the council's protocol and filming is available. Moving on to the agenda number, item number. Callum and Councillor Leo Pollock. Information of voting members. Can voting present in the room, appointees, and the scrutiny manager please introduce yourself? Yeah.
Councillor Gray. Councillor Reginald.
Councillor Sabina Emmanuel.
Simon Saville, Co-op.
Thank you. The second item on the agenda is notification of any items deemed urgent. There are no items. Disclosure of interests and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest in dispensations of any item? Moving on to item number 4, the meeting the 22nd of July and the 4th of October, enclosed with the papers. Date that actually, well, anyway, did members have any comments about the minutes to meeting? Thank you. So I did have a comment and a colleague who the I was expecting to be here, but so there was a suggestion that for a small amendment to the minutes for the meeting before October, item 6, and the amendment was to delete the word generous in the last sentence. But and this really comes back to the work we've done on the biodiversity review, where we're 30% planting in the street space schemes, and the current standards highways is for 10%, which highway was generous, and the work that we've done on the biodiversity review appropriate. We recommended 30% to remove the word. So on that basis, with this amendment, do we agree the minutes? Over. Thank you. So moving on to agenda item number 5, which is we're going to hear from Wheels for Wellbeing, Joyriders and the Strands. We're going to take together, firstly with a presentation from each, and then we're going to have a round table discussion as part of the process to provide evidence to review. So I am delighted to welcome Clements, Director for Wheels. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, so yeah, the Director of Wheels for Wellbeing based in Britain.
Thank you. Okay. Happy to go with. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So, yes, I'm the director of disability and cycling charity called Wheels for Wellbeing. Our Southwark base is at the. If I could have the first. Thank you very much. So we've been around since 2007, and we do a number of things. We all about the focus on access to cycling for disabled people. We are a disabled-led organisation, and so we talk about inclusive cycling, and we run inclusive at 3 venues. We organise bed rides, and we run. Those are our opportunities for disabled people to cycle, where we provide the opportunities, and those are all. We also campaign and do policy work, and that's national. We provide training and consultancy. We write publications. We wrote the first ever guide to cycling, sharing our knowledge and putting it available on our website for people to be available. New edition in the site, which is very exciting. We do a national survey every cycle. And our whole approach to our work about mobility, there's on the slide, targeting resources towards those who have least access to transport and mobility, rather than. Thank you very much. So when we ask disabled people who cycle their views, one of the questions we ask is whether cycling is easier or walking is easier. Because there's a perception that disabled people don't cycle. Of course, cycling kind of isn't a disability thing, but actually a lot of disabled people do cycle, and for them often cycling is easier. And I guess if cyclists think about it for a second, it's obvious it is easier than walking. Easier, it's fine. And so it is.
impairments. It's not. And so there's a couple of quotes here on my slide. Somebody says, I have spinal issues and I can't walk any real distance, but I cycle on what they call a normal bike without problem. It gives me my independence. And somebody else who says, I have had MS for 30 years and I wish I had realized earlier that I could cycle much better. And for those people for whom cycling is their mobility, if you can't cycle, you lose your mobility. If cycling is taken away from you, you lose your mobility. And there's plenty of people who haven't yet found that they could cycle, excluded from a number of reasons. And Disabled Ramblers did some research in too, and they found that 90% of mobility impaired disabled people don't have a suitable mobility aid to go for 1 kilometre. That's the stark reality of people with mobility. Just going down for a little, very local walk, if you don't have the right mobility aid, just doesn't. Hence, a lot of disabled people assume or are assumed only to be able to be driven. Thank you. You can have the next. So this is all we're talking today about active and physical and mental health and benefits of cycling. Well, cycling, when disabled people realize they can cycle, there are huge amounts of benefits for us. It can provide transport and increased mobility, social interactions. I mean, it's obvious, you know, what does moving out and about in the community provide? Access to nature and green spaces, autonomy and fun. So obviously extremely good for us. And those are all essential for good. That's why we're so passionate about campaigning so that more disabled people realize they can cycle and have access to cycling. You have the next. Now, the barriers to cycling for disabled people are numerous, sadly. Often the infrastructure that is provided for cycling isn't accessible to all disabled people with all our cycles. Parking and storage. So 53% of disabled people who cycle say infrastructure is their top barrier to cycling more often. Parking and storage, inaccessible parking and accessible storage for their cycle is the next barrier, the next most frequent barrier. And we know, if we know about the barrier number 3, which is the cost for 33% of disabled people who already cycle, they say that the cost is a huge barrier. But those are the people who've already found a way of acquiring their cycle. There are plenty of people out there for whom first barrier. If you can't cycle just a bicycle and you need something more of a non-standard cycle, then cost often comes as the first barrier. So if you can't find secure parking for it, why would you invest thousands of pounds into a cycle? You know, just to get stolen. There's the inability to hire a suitable cycle, you know, particularly if you need a non-standard cycle or an e-cycle. Some disabled people who cycle experience abuse on their cycle, and another barrier. I'll also add the fact that actually, even without experiencing abuse, a lot of disabled people do not cycle, even if they can, because they fear the results on their benefits, potentially. If they're seen to be too physically active, they might be judged to be not disabled enough for some reason, because of course your cycle magics away your disability. It doesn't, but it can be perceived as such. And some people get very aggravated about that for some reason. And there are not enough inclusive cycling opportunities in general. We have a lot in London, but actually nationally there aren't enough. The next slide. So just a few more quotes for you because really the voice of disabled people who cycle is really important to hear. Eric's, when Kay and Cole did some research and published a paper in 2020, and all these quotes are from her paper. Somebody said what the trike has done is it's actually given me freedom. There's an H missing there. Just that feeling of being out on the road, it was like freedom, said another person called Rose. Somebody else, Michael, said, I find it gives me the independence. So it's really powerful. And somebody else called Nasia said it's the independence, again, that word, which I haven't said. I think that's the other thing. You're not relying on transport, you're relying on your own transport. You're relying on yourself, and I think it's a big boost to anybody with a disability. You rely on yourself, and wherever you are, when you are on your bicycle, in her case, you rely on yourself. And whenever you are, you can, wherever you are, you can dictate what you do. No one else dictating what you do and what you can do. And that's really important. It's about having our own ability to move ourselves where we want to. Could have the next slide, please. So it's very much, cycling is very much a huge help to our mental health. Somebody else said, being a disabled person who can get out and cycle has been a lifesaver for me. When cycling, I feel less disabled, and it's the best treatment for my mental health. Somebody else said, I find it hugely enabling to cycle around for transport and my commute. It keeps me active and mobile, prevents degenerative decline in my muscles, and makes me feel good about myself. And Michael says it's better than counselling. And Paul said, to my mind, you can go one or two of two ways if you have an accident. Obviously, for people who are already disabled, they've grown up with that. But when something happens to you, like this, talking about himself, you can go one of two ways. You can sit in a chair and go, oh my goodness, this is terrible. What am I going to do? Or you can try and get on with life. And I think that if you can stay positive and do what you can do, what you could do before, then that certainly helps. I think if I hadn't had that, i.e. cycling, that would have been a very different story for me. So those were the voices of a number of disabled people who found cycling was the right thing for them. I've just put on this slide what we do here about enabling disabled people to realise and to practice cycling. We've got our three venues: Croydon Arena, Ladywell Day Centre, and of course your very own Herne Hill Velodrome in Southwark. One of your current or ex-councillors, I can't remember, on the Charlie there at our 10th anniversary a few years ago on the hand cycle, trying the fun of hand cycling. And that's my 10 minutes gone. Stop it. Well, now I'm going to. I've nearly there anyway. All right, can I have the next slide, please? This is just to show you where we are. That's it. A number of references are available once you get access to my slides. There is not a huge amount of research about disability and cycling, but these are papers that are available now. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That was brilliant. And just to be clear, the 10 minutes is a guide, so we're not going to cut you off. And so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is to hear from Joyriders. I am delighted to welcome Mariam Dreyer, Chief Executive of Joyriders, and can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, my name is Mariam. I'm the CEO of Joyriders, and I'm also a Dutch citizen. So I was born in the Netherlands, and in the country where I was born, cycling is a very common thing. It's something that is seen as something for the whole family, which everyone can do from a young age. Generally, helmets are not worn because it's just perceived as safe.
Could I ask, can you introduce yourself as well, please? Yeah.
Hello, I'm Scott. I am the John for Joyriders. I'm also a Southwark.
Yeah, and I moved to London in 2008, and I realized that cycling is very different here, and it's more seen as something for the brave. It's seen as a sport and not something everyone would like to do. So there are 2/3 of people in London would like to cycle more or would like to start cycling, but they don't feel it's safe to do. And at Joyriders, we kind of made it our mission to change that, change the image of cycling, but also give people the skills and tools what they need to become confident cyclists in London. So Joyrider started in 2016 in Waltham Forest, which I don't think is a coincidence because it's been at the forefront of making cycling more socially acceptable and more of an active travel tool rather than a sports tool. We became a social enterprise in 2020 and also expanded across London as much as we could. It was the pandemic that year, and in 2021 we expanded to Manchester, Oxford, and Cambridge, and shortly after we became a bikeability provider. So if you don't know, the Bikeability Trust is like the governing body of cycle training in England. We started cycle training in 2022, and we really wanted to focus on widening participation amongst groups who are the least likely to cycle, which are ethnic minorities, deprived communities, women, and people with health conditions, which Isabel already talked quite a bit about. We've been really focused on outreach because people don't just come to us, we go to them, we talk about what we're doing, and then they come to us. We provide bikes and helmets for everyone, and we like to teach families together because children will only cycle if the parents cycle. And last year in July, on the 1st of July, we started in Southwark. Next slide, please. So in Southwark, we are based in Burgess Park, and we run learn to ride sessions on weekends, school holidays, bank holidays, apart from Christmas, 24th, 25th. We do family rides, which is also kind of on-road training. We do Friday women's only sessions and women rides, and we do also have a volunteer-led group which does longer social rides, like you can see here in the photo. They went to the Thames barrier. Next slide, please. These are our numbers for November last month. We actually had to cancel 3 of our sessions because the weather was really, really bad. But we still had 266 total attendees, which consisted of 141 unique attendees. And overall, since last year, July, we had over 1,600 unique attendees, 3,400 participants overall, which I think is amazing. Next slide, please. So we are based in Burgess Park, but you can see here on the map where our participants come from. Our typical participant is Black and either between 5 and 12 or 26 and 45 years old, which you can see is like the parents and their children. And most of them live in Walworth and in Faraday wards, but yeah, you can see they come from all over the borough and also some slightly outside. We think these are mostly people who study or work in the borough. And you can see also we've put the index of deprivation up, and it really overlaps that the people who come often live in the most deprived areas within the borough. Next slide, please. So we did a survey as well last month, and this is just the children's riding ability, and you can see it's massively increased. Some of those children might still be learning, but you can see how much the ability to be able to ride a bike is gone up. Next slide, please. And then these are the families, so we can see how many more they've got their children's bike. The parents might already had bikes. Only 25% didn't do anything to get themselves bikes. Some use hire bikes because bike storage is always a problem for people. A very small percentage got rid of their bikes. I wouldn't know why, but let's hope they did that to get new bikes in future. Next slide, please. And we also looked at how much more people ride, and we can see 41% of participants are now riding for fun independently, but we also have people riding to school, riding to work, to the shops. Some are not riding independently yet, but are thinking about it. And I think quite a small percentage at 15% who haven't thought about anything at all yet or haven't made any changes. Next slide, please. This is a quote we had from one of the moms who said, "The sessions are always fantastic and my children always look forward to it. The staff are just the best with their words of encouragement. They are always encouraging parents to take part. In my household, we say, use our weekend for cycling and it's going to be a great one." One of my success story attending Joyriders is that my 6-year-old son is now teaching me to ride. I thought that the skills of the teachers were fantastic. They knew exactly how to support my son to learn to cycle, understanding what he would respond well to, and giving him the confidence he needed. And I think that's really important, that we understand what works for whom, because not everyone learns in the same way. And some people need more time than others. And it's an individual thing. So instructors are really treating people like individuals and not just like a big group of people who all have to do the same. Next slide, please. On our women's only sessions, we surveyed also last month 247 of our participants, and we had 21 responses. And again, you can see how riding ability is gone up quite a bit. Next slide, please. And what we noticed at the women is that not as many looked into getting bikes, and I think women have more barriers than other members of the public to get bikes. And I think women overall tend to be more cautious when it comes to cycling. But some of them got bikes for their children. Some obviously already had bikes. 26% still bought bikes, and the usage of hire bikes has gone up as well for some of them. And we still see, though, that 43% of the women do cycle now for fun, and some do the school run, riding to the shops, which is quite similar to the overall family survey we did previously. So, and just 13% haven't done anything yet. Next slide, please. This is Gertrude. Gertrude is a hairdresser. She has her own salon near Elephant and Castle, about a mile, I think, from Burgess Park. And she came last year to our sessions. She's never learned to ride as a child. She had developed some health issues, especially in her knee. And she attended for a month, but a lot of sessions over that month. And her knee pain got better while she started riding. She bought a bike once she felt confident enough, and she now cycles to work from Deptford to Elephant and Castle, 5 miles every day. And obviously stopped using her car as much, and also used the bike for groceries. And it's obviously great for her mental health. I think fantastic photo. She looks really happy. And obviously she loves it. I think that's a really good example of what we can achieve, even in women who are slightly older, to still get them cycling, and they can start cycling. You're never too old for it. Next slide, please. This is just some of our instructors in the park. And I think one thing we wanted to bring up, so this space we use in Burgess Park now is next to the Giraffe House, which is being torn down and redeveloped as a skate park, as far as I know. And I think that's something that we've been in touch with other councillors and stuff, but no one seems to know what's going to happen with our space. And I think I would really love if someone could kind of look into that and give us an answer to that. Yeah, next slide, please. And this is just our contact details. Our website is currently being redeveloped, so it doesn't look that great at the moment, but it will be soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to say to both of you, really enjoyed joyful experience to listen to the enthusiasm that you obviously expressed, but also other people. And I'm sure Alison will not. I should have waited and then say that's all you do. So our agenda item number 7, we're going to hear from Sustrans. So I am delighted to welcome Alison Litherland, who is head of the behaviour change team at Sustrans. Could you please introduce yourself, Alison?
Yes, I'm Alison. Captures me people sounds a bit Orwellian when you say behaviour change, and other teams within help change this. Just going to share a few transactions I've got.
Thank you. Alison, can I ask you please just to talk in the microphone direction? Thank you.
So yeah, as I was saying, the hard act to follow, 2 of my heroes. And we all know each other because it's a small industry. But yeah, I'll sort of do a brief introduction to what Sustrans are. Most of you may be aware of Sustrans, but our mission is really simple. We just want to make it easier for everyone to walk, wheel, and cycle more. And we hope by doing that, that we'll create a society where we travel, creates healthier places and happier lives for everyone. When I was looking at the Southwark Streets for People strategy, very similar, very, very similar. So this is our approach to how we go about making it easier for people to walk and cycle. We first of all do our very first stage of scoping, which is understanding the context within which we're working. And then we have a phase called Discover, which is doing really in-depth understanding of what the barriers, but also what's the motivation. So what's stopping people, but also why might they want to? And it's very interesting that very often the motivations are not the things that we might think of. So they're not really the environment, not really air. People may admit that they're concerned about those, but that isn't what's going to make them change their behaviours. And then we co-design interventions, and this is where we split off. So at Sustrans, we have the privilege of having people like me, who are people, and we have people who design infrastructure, and so we sort of do both. So co-design the interventions, whether that's changes to the street environment, or whether that's designing a program of activity, much like Miriam and Isabel have been talking about. We test those, because quite often you can sort of work with people and say, oh, you know, oh yes, I'd love to do this on a Tuesday afternoon, and yeah, it needs to be this time in this group. And then you try that for about a month. And so test. If it doesn't work, try something different. And then finally try and implement a program of interventions, especially in sort of other more people-focused work. And everything we do in partnership. And Sustrans is not about being here or being involved forever. So we are always looking to have the right partners on the ground and hand over the project so that it has some legacy and sustainability. So that's kind of our approach. Our theory of behaviour change is about addressing people's capability. So capabilities like skills. Do they know how? Opportunity. So Isabel said some really important things about like the lack of opportunity of access to cycles. And then the really key one of motivation, and what is the thing that makes people actually want to cycle more. And it's really interesting, Isabel mentioned independence, because one of my case studies, independence for another group, is also one of the main motivators. And if you are able to address all of these, it will result in behaviour change. However, sometimes you may not be able to address some of it's good to understand, we couldn't change the opportunity because we changed the road, we couldn't change the capabilities for this, and we understand where that barrier still is and what we need to do. Maybe we can't do it today, maybe we can't do it tomorrow, but we know we want to get there eventually. So there's some stats about we work in 3 different ways as a behaviour change team. We deliver directly to participants, which I call eating the cake, because you get to be on the ground and seeing the smiles. We deliver indirectly, so we provide advice and guidance. And then we do a combination of both. And I would say most of our projects sit in that middle bit, where we are working with people directly on the ground, but we're upskilling our partners or our funders or a local authority to be able to continue to deliver the project once our expertise has sort of been embedded in these. And you can have the slides afterwards, so don't try and read it all. It's too much detail. I'm going to focus in on a couple of case studies. Okay. So I'm going to focus on 3 case studies: teenage cycling, East End mums, and GPs. I thought there were 3 relevant groups for what you were looking at. So we know for teenage girls particularly, there's a real drop-off in activity. There's also a real drop-off in cycling when people move to secondary school. This is where we get zip cards. And so the Bikeability Trust is conscious about this, and also conscious that an awful lot of people don't have the opportunity to participate in cycle training at primary school. So I, back in the day, was a cycle trainer, and you go into school, you deliver bikeability cycle training, but very often if you have a cycle, you're not allowed to be involved. If you're not able to cycle well enough, you're not able to be involved. And so the Bikeability Trust was aware that a lot of kids or young people were moving up to hadn't had that opportunity. They opened up this fund, and we worked with them to develop this program where we were particularly focusing on haven't had the opportunity to do bikeability, also girls, students with special educational needs, and were eligible. And so we talked to those young people about what was stopping them. And one of the biggest things was the peer influence. Not cool, not what my friends are doing. But the other three barriers are very common barriers across. They didn't have access to a cycle. They didn't have anywhere safe to ride a cycle. They didn't have any. And like looking at the cycling action plan, it looked like these are all things you're looking to address. How do we address the peer influence? And so what we did was we had a real team focus. We designed the program with the young people, and we had some groups that were just girls, and some groups that were mixed. And we sort of based that around the people's interests. It was entirely, we just took them on bike rides. We said, where would you like to go on your bike? And we went to those places on them. We might ride up to a junction and say, oh, if you were doing this on your own, do you want to work out how to do this? We never used the word safe. We always used the word, oh, if you were trying to do this independently. There's actually a blog that one of my colleagues has written about advice for cycle trainers, which is about using the correct language with teenagers to reward their desire to take risk, and to help them like enjoy cycling, because they were watching some cycle trainers do it and they're like, oh, you're just saying it wrong, and you're not. The young people weren't responding very well. The other thing is we focused on the point of transition. So we worked with most of these pupils when 6 post-SATs. We worked with them through summer school. And then this cohort of kids started secondary school, new friends, and there were new friends that cycled together. We also installed within the school a cycle library. So everybody who participated in this cycle training had access to the cycles and could ride them and leave them at school. Got foldable cycles so that we could fold them up at home, because we knew that cycle storage was an issue. And we then, we did this for about sort of through the summer and into October. And then we set the school up to have the cycle trainers come in next year to do the cycle training. And we're like, well, once you've done that, then don't let those kids use your bikes. There are more kids that can use the bikes. And actually, some of the young people decided they wanted to run the cycle library and got really involved. So it was really great. But absolutely key to the motivation to cycle there was independence. I can do it by myself. I can get to it was in Haringey. I can get to the Westfield by myself. I can get to McDonald's by myself. And yeah, the resulted in behaviour change. About 50% of them were cycling at least one day a week. After 50% more. But the interesting point is participants felt safe cycling on their local roads. So at the start, they'd said there's nowhere safe to cycle. But actually, after working with the trainers and our team, they actually felt, I am safe. And they said some really interesting things like, you see these plant things here? They're really good. And I like these roads. So we were like, yes, get in, kids. So East End Mums, this is Poplar and Tower Hamlets. And I was working in the primary schools, doing a school's modal shift, trying to get more kids to cycle in school. And I was having the same conversation over and over again with mums, mainly from Somali and Bangladeshi backgrounds, that were saying, we want to cycle, but nothing in the way cycle training is provided works for us. So I sort of continue to have these conversations. There was a report, Tower Hamlets takes part in the Walking and Cycling Index, which is a really in-depth piece of research into the barriers to walking and cycling. And so we had quite a lot of data there. So we were able then to take that to a couple of different funders and say, this is what is needed to enable this group of people who want to cycle more. And we were very lucky to make a patchwork of funding, including being given a shop in Oakley Street Market. So the main barriers that they were saying were initially the sort of standard ones of concerns over road safety, access to cycles, lack of cycle storage. It's a really big problem in lack of citizens' confidence. But then there was this idea that it wasn't culturally normal for them. They were saying it's not culturally normal for women to cycle in our community. However, if we all do it together, we can do it. So we don't want to come where one person gets a cycle training lesson and like, I maybe can ride quite well, but my friend can't. We want to come together. We all want to do it together. So we said, okay, let's design that. The other thing was they really wanted to have everything to be female-led. So we set up Chris Street Community Cycles. I'm like Serena's up here for the second time. So we took a shop front provided by Hill, I think it was the developer. Empty shop. There's nothing inside. It's a complete shell. We put some bikes in, some nice stickers on the front, and we provided cycle loans. So if you turned up, you could loan a cycle. We recruited local women who we developed and paid to deliver the cycle training alongside us. We were right next door to Iceland. If you're ever going to set up a cycle hub, we're right next door to Iceland, opposite the library. It's so good because people would come past. We would just stand outside with the bikes and people would come and have multiple conversations with us. And over time, they grew to trust us and they decided to give it a try. We engaged women through engaging their children. So we ran a summer program, and then after the summer program, a lot of the women, we said, you can come alongside your kids, but we have to take a bike because you have to role model for them. And they would take the bike and maybe not on it. And then at the end of the summer program, they'd drop the kids up and come to the street and have a go on the bikes with us. I mean, we also would train one or two women in a session. And then the next week, 10 of them would come get some bikes and go off, do their own training with each other. It was really nice. And it was because we designed it exactly as they were like, this is what we need. And we were like, okay, we'll do that then. One of the real keys, though, was that we were flexible. So rather than having a fixed itinerary of what was happening, you turned up for a bike ride, but actually you couldn't ride a bike. We do a learned cycle. You turned up with your son's bike, and you were like, I thought I was going to be able to, we would fix it. We never said you're in the wrong place, this isn't the right place for you. We were like, okay, if that's what you need, that's what we'll do. And that is complicated. You need to have quite experienced, quite skilled staff. We also had a member of staff who could speak some of the local languages, which is also just absolutely key. And then we celebrated everybody's journey. So if your journey was getting your foot on one of the pedals for the first time, we'd have a monthly celebration to celebrate that. Somebody else might have cycled all the way to Tower Bridge. That was something to celebrate. So that's the mums. And yeah, there's some stats here to show that like at returning, participants spend more time cycling and felt happier and healthier. And the GPs, I'm not going to go through some loads of details, but I think GPs are a really interesting opportunity for creating role models. So we worked with GPs in Lambeth and in Bexley to provide them with what they needed to be able to cycle more, providing bespoke cycle equipment. So rather than just saying, oh, here's a load of pool bikes that you can use, we were like, what journeys are you making? Where are you making? Are you making journeys with kids? Okay, let's make sure we've got the right bikes for you. But I think that what's really key with GPs is they were then able to role model that broadly and sort of sell the health benefits of cycling, and they're great advocates for health. So yeah, we did. The main thing we provided there was cycle buddies and the system, and that project has recently finished. And so the behaviour change is happening right now. So I can't tell you how many people have changed their behaviours because behaviour change takes time. So key recommendations I have for the public are work out who's not cycling, and walking and wheeling, and engage those groups to understand what would motivate them to cycle more, and what are their barriers. Design interventions that meet their needs and allow continuous feedback throughout your program for to adapt to their needs. Make sure you measure your impact and make sure you're reaching the demographics that you're trying to reach. And accept that behaviour change takes time and requires ongoing support. And don't forget to activate. So there's a lot of it. Sounds like you're going to be doing lots of really great stuff about cycle parking, cycle loans, school street. Sometimes you just need some really enthusiastic people holding people's hands through the first few weeks of that to bring people along with you.
Thank you very much. And just so Alison just proved that Isabel and Miriam didn't have a monopoly on joy. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. So what I thought would be easier, sort of, to use our time best, is to have roundtable discussions. So I'm really keen to hear members' questions, but then it'd be a question sort of that we would perhaps put to all three of our guests. Do members have anything? Councillor Roberts, thank you.
Thank you. As someone who can't really ride a bike yet, well, you know, I knew this was going to cause trouble. I mean, it's really great to hear about the work and that you're all doing, and I know that our colleague, the now mayor, learned to ride a bike as well. She did try to persuade me to come.
That was with Joyriders. And for everybody who's listening, our mayor, of course, is a woman of Somali origin. And she has been delighted to take part in that.
She has, absolutely. I just wanted to know what the impact of, obviously we had a summer of sport with the Olympics and Paralympics. I just wanted to think about if you kind of tapped into that kind of, you know, the gold rush kind of feeling of, you know, especially for kids with disability or mobility issues, if there's been any kind of uptake through that, if you've seen any.
I guess it's difficult to say for a start. In 2012, we were also, you know, great hopes that London 2012, etc. Suddenly there'd be a rush. The enthusiasm built over the, you know, from the as a result of the Olympics and Paralympics I think is quite short-lived, and it's quite intimidating for other people. So it's exciting, but it's also, but it's not for me. So it doesn't magic away the barriers to cycling at all. It can build further enthusiasm and ambition to some extent. But I guess we're working, and I presume we all are working with the people the furthest away from cycling. And just watching the Olympics and Paralympics isn't enough. It's great. Obviously, we're particularly keen on the Paralympics, but with the total awareness that it could actually put people off and just, it's great, but it's not for me, or it's not for my child. So all fantastic, just not enough. And sometimes actually we don't want to be representing sport at all. But it's all a complex.
Thank you. Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Our service will often run at capacity, whether it's an Olympic year or not, to be honest. So we can't really say that we noticed anything. And similar to what Isabel was saying, we don't use the word cycling on our website because of the connotations that has with sport when we're trying to encourage everyday behaviour change.
Any other comments? Yeah, please speak.
Yeah, I think we are just more, and probably all three groups here are more really about active travel and about leisure cycling rather than cycling as a sport. But I do think that maybe more the children who take part in Burgess Park, like the BMX track, maybe I'm more inspired. There was a one, and I don't remember the name, one of the Olympians was from London, a BMX cyclist, and that certainly encouraged some young people, but not necessarily the people we work with.
Kai White, for the record. Yeah.
who is a Southwark born and bred. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Papula.
Cheers, Chair, and thank you so much for your presentation. As opposed to my colleague, I've got and only learned how to cycle during the pandemic. You learn how to cycle on the, and one thing I did note in the something that was purchased by gets into straight to with those obtain a bike, ride a bike. The bespoke bikes to get your
Absolutely, thank you. You're absolutely right. There's, I mean, constant cycles. There's a lot of similar technology involved, but it's sometimes the wrong way around, or much longer chain, and some people need adaptation. To be very honest with you, we haven't particularly put a lot of energy and time into that so far, because the majority of the people who cycle with us cycle on our own cycles, and therefore we maintain them. And we're just getting into with Sustrans into a project which is all about loaning people to cycle for a period of time, as opposed to just coming in during our in order to remove that barrier to cycle higher. So having a real go at cycling in your own community, etc. Does it work for you? And that's really tapping into the desire to own your own cycle. And then, of course, you hit yourself against the cost barrier. So we're edging little by little along that journey with people. Some people have already acquired, and they've worked out their own, whether it's a friendly local shop, a bike shop, etc. But as I say, it's not at the top of our agenda just because of the population we're working with at the moment, but it will become it, hopefully, and then we'll be then hoping to work with people to develop their skills also, and in fact develop the skills of the cycle shops and even the big chains like Halfords, etc. I'm saying you expect disabled people to come through your doors, make yourself accessible. That's another barrier. Yeah, we're working slowly. Mariam.
Yeah, there is an organization in the borough which is called CycleWorks, who actually does go into schools and teach school children how to maintain bikes. They also run Dr. Bikes, where residents can come with their own bike and they do, well, I wouldn't say full repairs, but do adjustments and minor repairs. Obviously, if something bigger is broken, people do need to go to a bike shop. But I think it's a good organization also to advise residents of it, because often when you're a new bike owner, it can be very intimidating to go into a bike shop, especially if you're a woman or you have some sorts of special needs, health issues. People are really worried to go into a bike shop and worried that they've been given wrong advice or being ripped off or whatever. So I think having someone else who runs Dr. Bikes and can advise, like, this is wrong or that's wrong, that really helps and creates confidence as well in people to go to a bike shop when they have to. We often come across people who have a bike and then they say, like, my bike is broken And when you ask what's wrong, they say, well, the tires is flat. And often it really just needs pumping up. It's not even a puncture, it just needs a pump. But I think, yeah, there needs to be more done to educate people how to maintain their bike and how to do small measures of maintenance themselves, like pumping tires or adjusting brakes. And we do run workshops in other boroughs. Actually, the project Alison just talked about in Poplar Harker, we are running a build a bike workshop there at the moment. So we do that in other boroughs, but not in Southwark at the moment. But yeah, it's really important to educate people on bike maintenance as well and give them the confidence to do that by themselves.
Thank you. I have to say that before, another of our fellow councillors who also said exactly that, yeah, well, she hasn't cycled for a while because we had another flat. Alison, thank you.
Sorry, yeah. So I would encourage you all to read the access to support, which Sustrans is just voucher scheme for people who, or it's a request that Sustrans currently that we would like to, you can't do cycle to work if you're paid enough the gas that we have government at the moment, but within that there's stuff around how people make bikes, within everything that how to care for your bike, pumping your tires up, oiling your chain is part of how to care for your bike. But actually, if you don't have very much money, you buy for what for you is very expensive. Then actually that bike may not be the easiest to maintain long term, and you can be in a bit of a cycle. I've done a lot of Dr. bikes in my time where you're like, this can't really be fixed. And I know that for you, £250 that you spent on this bike is a lot of money, but actually it doesn't have some of the right components, and it's very difficult to know how to get how to assess, one £250 bike versus another, which one's actually going to be the easiest. So I think there's a lot of education there that could also. We're also seeing more cycles within the market that people don't own. The Swap Fleets is now here, which is a cycle loan scheme where if you have a bike damage, just let them know. They come and get it, switch it out for another one. You've got Try Before You Bike, which is done by Pedal by Wheels, who are the other partners in our Inclusive Loan project. But yeah, there's maybe ownership is not the right thing. Maybe something where people can return them. There's lots of different options, and probably need all of those.
Thank you very much, Councillor Emmanuel.
Yeah, I don't want to give the wrong impression that I don't have a bike and I'm not interested in it. As a child, we had one boat in the house. I do have another one in the house, but it's an exercise bike. My son encourages me to get on it and exercise. But for me, I would not go out on the road with it. My son can ride, and we actually have a bike outside in the garden. I just don't have the confidence and I think of too many things that could go wrong. That at my time of life, I don't want to go wrong. So, in Reggie's ward, in really early on when we used to go to school, they had a bike center up the top there. They used to teach them everything. Unfortunately, no funding, and so it went by the wayside. But we did have one growing up. But at the moment, I would not be on a bike. Not because I hate it, not because I don't think it's a valid thing. I think it goes parallel with the community we have. Everything goes within reason. But I'm not against teaching it or having fun with it and stuff. I quite like watching on telly. But for me, I wouldn't go with it. So just to dispel the
Can I then turn that into a question? And so what advice would you give to Sabina?
I would say give it a chance. We do cycling in Burgess Park. It's a very safe environment. It's quite segregated from the rest of the park, and it's also to some extent a bit private, so that you're not kind of too exposed to the public. And I think often we have people who come, mostly parents or grandparents who come with their grandchildren. I think we want the child to learn and we don't want to, and they sit there, and at one point we do convince them to join in, and they actually really enjoy it. And I think cycling, there's loads to cycling. It doesn't have to be cycling on the road. It can just be cycling in the park, but it's really good for mental health, for physical health, and it's so much more fun than an exercise bike at home in your living room. Really. And yeah, your mayor, she came and she learned to cycle with us, and it took her a while, but she had a lot of fun, and she was really, really keen. Yes, yes, you both can come together. Bring a friend. It's really great to come with a friend. I think a lot of women do that, and they enjoy themselves so much more.
Thank you, Isabel.
All right, we'll just add to the, but we're not trying to convince you. To be honest, you'll only do it if you would like to, and that's totally fine. But I would say if you would like to come and see what we do at the velodrome, because there is absolutely no traffic, and it's, I don't know if you've been. Many people haven't been to the velodrome who've lived in Southwark forever, but it's just this beautifully green space where you forget you're even in London. And people just are able to exercise more fun than on the exercise bike too, in my view as well. But for me, it's like just being there, even though I do cycle on the roads, but actually being there at the velodrome amongst lots of other people who are just there. The only thing they've got in common is they're wanting to gently exercise, and they're wanting to be together and in amongst greenery. And that's all we do really, is to get people's hearts pumping and muscles pumping, and then it's quite a joyful experience. If it's raining, not bother unless you really like being out in the rain. But when it's beautiful weather, there's no. But it's not for everyone.
Do you mind, Sabina, if I mention that? As certainly members are aware, I've been trying to organise a trip to the Hernhill Velodrome to see the fantastic work that Wheels for Wellbeing is doing. And I put out a message a little while ago saying, this date, please let me know if you can come. And I had a couple of responses from people saying they couldn't come, but I didn't have any responses from people saying they could. So I thought, oh, okay, we'll have to rearrange in January. And then last week, I got a telephone call from Sabina, who had, so Sabina knows where the velodrome is. and so there you go. I think the willing was definitely there. So now it's just sort of taking that. And it was such a shame that we weren't there all together, but we will get there. And if I may, you probably saw when you were there, but as you say, there are risks that are worth or not worth taking at different times in our lives, and we might be more aware of not wanting to fall, and there is a risk of falling with being on two wheels. Just stopping. A lot of the accidents happen just by people falling off their bikes when they're just stopping or about to start. But there are tricycles, recumbent tricycles, really, really comfortable, and you are getting your muscles and your heart pumping, etc. But you're not on two wheels, and you are at no risk because there's no traffic. You're not going to fall. So there's even that. It's just really doing it in comfort, and or doing it in tandem with somebody else, chatting along, sitting next to each other, and both cycling. And so it really doesn't have to be a sport. It doesn't even have to be exercise. It can just be chatting away together with your friends in the outdoors. That's the main difference, I would say, with the exercise. Just that extra mental health element that the outdoors give. Thank you, Alison. Did you have any advice that you could offer somebody who feels that cycling is not for them?
I would say if you think cycling, like what would make you want? What is there anything in that makes you, that would make.
I suppose thinking of escaping something like a flood or something, and and I have to go fast. It's better than running.
Yeah.
That's what I think of.
So, I mean, I think if that's the case, you probably need to practice a little bit beforehand, just to get ready. I mean, I swim for similar reasons. I'm like, I swim often, but just, it's one day. Yeah. But yeah, I would encourage like people to think about like, why would you want to, what would be the benefits for you doing it? And then if it feels like, oh, there is an opportunity, there's some people, it does sound like you've got some fellow counsellors that would quite like to go with you, then that might be nice. But then equally, some people might, I don't want to try anything new near anybody I know. That's equally fine. Miriam's got a really support people that you could do a one-on-one session with. Yeah, take it. Wait to do what works best for you.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Neil.
For the original, thank you, the original Cleaner, Greener, Safer grant that we gave to the original Birding Bush BMX track, which then became Peckham BMX. I was expecting a call from officers saying, well, councillor, we could do cricket or we could even do tennis, street sports. I'm sorry, councillor, you're pushing it too far. And it's great to see how the culture's changed. I've got a couple of really brief questions about bashing the barriers, Isabel. Are there any barriers? Because I think most of the cycle paths are designed for bicycles. I've got a friend who's got balance problems and uses a tricycle. Are there any barriers in Southwark that we need to where are your pet hates in Southwark?
I haven't come prepared with a list. That's a definite fault on my part.
Well, you're pushing an open door here.
Thank you. I will. And I mean, I noticed one. I experienced one, but it wasn't, I don't think, on a cycle route just now. And I can't tell you where it is, but it's not far because I was getting lost. But because a lot of disabled people, when you use it, as I do, I can't get off and push my bike. I'm turning my wheelchair into a hand cycle. And I got lost and I ended up taking a little area which must be walking environment, not cycling environment. But the barriers there were so tight. I don't think even in just my wheelchair I could have got through. So I'd have to trace back. Actually, I don't particularly want to go back there. It wasn't very pleasant. But there are certain barriers which are on walking environments which are really not. The alternative, which I did find, didn't have a drop curb. So I had to throw myself off of, not horrendous, but, quite a curb. So it's thinking about the juncture between, that's why we always encourage people to use the 2 words, walking stroke wheeling together, and enabling people who are using a cycle as a mobility aid to go through walking environments at walking pace. So there's some of those. There's definitely one I need to go and find again for you. But I will, thank you for asking that. I will go back and ask my colleagues.
Marion, you mentioned that, and quite rightly so, in Holland, cyclists only have a bicycle. They're not required, they're not expected to wear helmets. And then you went on to say that you lend helmets and bicycles. Isn't there this idea that by giving people helmets, you're sort of reinforcing this they're at risk culture?
So when we started here in Southwark, the council required us to use helmets. We do have a waiver that people can sign if they don't want to wear a helmet. Personally, I don't actually wear one. It's a personal choice, and quite a few people actually choose not to wear a helmet. But yeah, it was the council when we started here who actually, the council officer at the time, made it mandatory that we have to use helmets. But I think also there are people who want to wear helmets and there are others who don't. And I think we just want to give people the choice. And if they want to wear one, they should have the opportunity to be able to wear one. And if they don't want to wear one, it should be again, they should have that opportunity.
Undoubtedly, feel that there's this conversion. Question. Do the site, I'm not sure who, maybe two questions, I'll just land these two at the same time. Panel, or what is now the visibility panel. Do our lockers that we install or that have been installed in Southwark, do they accommodate tricycles and non-standard bike types? And solid tyres be one way to help people get over solid tyres?
So I think the bike lockers are the cycle hoops. Yeah, they don't usually accommodate tricycles. You can even have difficulties to put in a larger, like Dutch style bike. They don't fit in because the handlebars are often higher. So I have a bike like that, and it actually doesn't fit in. But there are bike lockers which are designed for adapted bikes and for cargo bikes who do accommodate them. Westminster Council has at least one installed. One, yes. We also have a couple in Walton Forest actually, so they do exist. And they do exist, and but they are very rarely installed by local authorities. So it would be great to see more of them installed in places, not just for adapted cycles, but also for cargo bikes, so that families can buy a cargo bike and transport their children along. So there are many cycles which are non-standard who need to be stored for different opportunities. And regarding the tires, I would say I think solid tires maybe not. But I did put slime in my tires, and that's fantastic. I've had a puncture recently. I've put in some slime, and the bike is still going strong without having fixed the inner tube. So I'm a big fan of slime. Or there are tire inserts which you can buy, which are not making tires fully solid, but just make it a bit more thicker. So if something goes in, you don't get a puncture. There are different options available, and I think yeah, we should educate maybe people more about using them as well.
Thank you, Alison. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, cycle parking is the biggest barrier to people cycling in London, without a doubt. There are a lot. I can't own a standard non-folding. It's just not possible for me. All the cycle hoops that are near me that I can afford aren't cheap. Really, like for the families I was working with on Chris Street, we've got 2-3 kids. You can't fit it in there. But a lot of us in London, particularly in central London, we live in little flats. A lot of us don't have lifts. A lot of us can't carry that cycle, whatever type of cycle that is, up and down a lift. This is one of the things. So there's another report that I shared with Julia. I think we shared with you afterwards, is about access to cycle parking. I think it's a huge issue, and I think this our new Labour government is going to build lots of houses. And we need to be working really closely with the housing sector to retrofit estates like mine, because in my estate, I have a parking bay, I drive, and I have a relationship with, I know through work, the person that installs the hangers. He had budget, so he wanted to put a cycle hanger on my parking bay. My whole block, everybody in my block were like, yes, that would be amazing. But we couldn't do it because the housing association didn't actually own the land that was on the ground. And they were saying, well, we can't park cycles at the estate because that would be dangerous. It's only be safe. So like, I think the majority of Londoners live in smaller flats, don't have that much space. Like, it's a huge issue. And I think we need to be really lobbying our colleagues and our sort of partners in housing associations and saying fixes on the project. Isabel and I Pedal My Wheels are working on, where people get to loan an adapted cycle. One of the things we sort of wanted to make sure was that people park them on street, and we've got the insurance that people can park them on street. And actually, if you talk about countries where people cycle a lot more, then there is a lot more on-street cycle parking, and there's a lot less expensive cycles that are owned, or there's so much of them. But it's a real pack. I spent years in the northeast of England and now as in London, talking to people about what stops you cycling, and the biggest barrier is always, where would I put it? And even most cycle storage, if you've got underground cycle storage, are you as a woman on your own going to want to go down to a dark place and take this expensive thing? There's just it's almost like nobody thought about the experience. Yeah.
I could, Chair. Finally, I wondered how the pro cyclists here feel that to park a car on a housing estate, residence is free, but it's actually there's a charge to park bicycles. So tell us how you feel about that.
I think we can all agree that that is not the way it should be. I assume I can speak for everybody on that. I'm slightly conscious of time. I wanted to actually round off with a question which effectively, Alison, you've kind of sort of started to answer. What would you look for from central government? Obviously, we as a council, we're doing what we can, but if you think sort of on a wider level, and obviously, there's more particular support with, what would you think would be the biggest asks from government at this stage? I'll go first. We're particularly campaigning for a change in the law around the recognition of cycles as mobility aids, because that's at the end of the day, that's what government can change for us. In London, a lot of the cycling and active travel funding comes through TfL, and obviously there's the agreement between we want government to have a better relationship with TfL, and hopefully they will have and fund them better, so the TfL can fund you guys better. But in terms of legislation, there is we're trying to change minds around bringing the end of the infamous invalid carriage regulations into something a little bit more modern and enabling, so that disabled people can benefit from all the innovation that is coming along through micromobility and the recognition of low energy or zero energy vehicles, which are going to hopefully be through that regulation process, that we can have cycles recognised as mobility aids and sort of take the lid off the limitations that disabled people have at the moment in terms of what they're allowed to use as an aid to their mobility, when they're on the pavement at the beginning or the end of the journey. So that's us for central government. That's our big ask, and also not to kill the e-bike goose that laid the golden egg through bringing. There is already EPAC regulation, and it's just not being enforced. There's a lot of people who are creating concerns around safety, but also fire safety in particular, using kit which is not appropriate and not compliant. And there's a tendency to be in the press, etc., and some MPs to be putting pressure to say, let's regulate this out, or some councils are starting to stop e-bikes in their city centres, etc. Terrible development, because in Holland, the more women age, the more they cycle, the more people age in general, the more they cycle e-cycles to carry on having their own independence, etc. E-cycling is fantastic, and we need to continue to encourage it and not let government regulate it out of the. It needs regulation, more to the point, it needs enforcement. So funding active travel, and then doing the right thing legally on the regulations.
Thank you very much. So enforcement rather than over-regulation. No, that's a really interesting observation. Thank you. Mariam.
I think from our side, I think all that Isabel said, especially about the e-bikes, I think really, really important that we don't condemn all e-bikes, but make that distinction. Then also funding in infrastructure is really important. Good infrastructure, not just putting some paint on roads or put something in which doesn't work. Good infrastructure, being bolder in what is being put into place, I think, and investment in training and not just bikeability in schools, but training for everyone in a way that it works for people and not just saying, oh, we're giving you 2 hours of training, because for someone who can't cycle, that's not enough. Training needs to be designed for the communities it's happening in. And bikeability in schools is not the only training, but that's often seen as the standard training, but it doesn't work because often those children, like Alison said in her presentation, they don't get to take part. The children who need it the most don't get to take part in it because there are barriers in place. And cycle parking, because cycle parking is the biggest barrier across almost all communities, not just in London, but in many communities in England, especially in cities. That needs investment as well. And there needs to be solutions for that one.
Thank you very much. Alison, did you have anything to add?
Just to sort of round up, so the cycle voucher thing and cycle parking is the sort of big sustenance. They just sort of reflect on, make sure that your intervention, you're doing amazing work in Southwark. There's like at Sustrans, we were involved in the Street to People surveys. We're really excited about what's happening. It's get really excited about us sort of doing this kind of work. But make sure that your interventions are there for the people to make the most out of it, and make sure that and that might need a bit more thinking, that might need a bit more activation, and it might need, but make sure that these provisions, going to do mobility, micro mobility hubs, that you're making sure that the people who could make them take the most advantage and have the least access to other forms of are able to use it. I think that's more my kind of person.
Thank you very much. No, go ahead.
Infrastructure must support all types of cyclists, not just the professional and the confident. And throughout the design process for new infrastructure, there must be support to engage lots of different groups in the redesign of cycling infrastructure, so that we can see how people use it and we can adapt it further to suit more types of people. The Cycle Superhighways program is great, but it can sometimes exclude cyclists who don't use the Cycle Superhighways for commuting to work, who use it for different reasons. Who might be, for example, turning off who might be using it to get to other cycle routes isn't necessarily worth it. So constant redesign with more people to understand how people want to cycle around an area.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add as well, so Alison, I'm conscious you referred to a couple of papers that you've presented. Just for anybody else who is listening now or afterwards, those papers were all attached to the agenda. So they were provided to members in advance, and they're sort of on the council's website as well. I'll let Sabine, of course, use.
Some people have the mindset that if you're on a bike, that you're infallible. And that needs to change because it's putting a lot of other people at risk. And going through, I see them going in and out. I was screaming on the bus because this guy just went inside the front of the bus. And I thought, that's not necessary. So there needed to be training as to how safe you go about your cycle.
Thank you very much, Sabina. I think so training, that's great. I think everybody here supports that idea, and everybody supports the idea, I'm sure, of people cycling safely and sensibly and responsibly in relation to everybody else as well. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us this evening, and that's given us a huge amount of feedback to work with, and which will be a really useful contribution to the piece of work that we're doing. Thank you, and have a lovely evening. You're welcome.
See you at the velodrome.
And see you. That's right.
In the new year.
So we will get to the velodrome to see what goes on there with Wheels of Wellbeing sometime in the new year, as soon as possible. You have to come. Thank you so much, all of you. I'm going to suggest to members that we have a 5-minute comfort break before moving on with the agenda. So can we say we are back here sitting down by 2040, please? Thank you. where we're going to look at the supplementary planning documents. Please can I welcome Charlotte Brooks Lowry, who is Planning Policy Manager and who will present the enclosed draft supplementary planning documents. We're going to look at the Climate and Environment SPD and the Household Development SPD. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you for inviting me here today. We met earlier on in the year, you might remember, we had to do a net gain. Obviously here the remit is broader and we're talking new SPDs. So where we are with the supplementary planning, they were out for consultation for 3 months. Consultation closed on the 20th of November. So we're in the process of reviewing the SPD. The householder SPD received a total of 58 comments, and the climate and environment SPD, there was a total of 51. We sent an email out to over 30,000 people on the mailing list, and we held a number of events. We had a developer event, we had an event with the Youth Parliament, which brought about a really interesting with the there. And we held 2 community events. So in terms of coverage, we really tried to get the message out there. We also did, leafleting and hybrids, posters, thing. So I think it's fair to say that they've generally been well received, the SPDs. Perhaps if I start with the climate environment SPD, so we'll talk through that. So the climate environment SPD. Yeah, a supplementary planning document, and what that does is it provides additional guidance on existing Southwark land policies. So we can't write new policy in an SPD, but we can provide additional detail and explain to applicants the best practice and what we expect to see. Yeah, no problem. So the climate environment SPD, has a really broad remit, and I think that's a strength. So we're covering everything from energy and sustainability standards, minimising flood risk, air quality, green infrastructure, movement and transport, including walking, wheeling. I mean, it was a really interesting, and actually a lot of the comments which were raised by Potted are actually in this SPD. So we've addressed things like, accessible cycle racks. Don't want cycle racks that are stacked high, really difficult to provide onto. We've looked at aspects such as lighting, making sure that cycle parking is in. So I think that's worth flagging. And finally, there's a section on waste management. So the sort of biodiversity and green chapter received quite a number of comments actually. Majority of the comments were supportive or asking just for clarifications, because a section of that does look at biodiversity net gain and what we expect to see in Southwark. If I can answer any additional you may in particular. The flood risk section, again, that's welcomed. Southwark is in high risk flood area. We're obviously reliant on the Thames barrier, and the impact of climate change is making that flood risk more significant over time. So in its entirety, all of these measures are helping to increase, or intention is that they help to increase the resilience of Southwark in terms of climate change, and we're putting forward the mitigation measures that we expect developers to incorporate into their design. So do you want me to just pause there and take any specific questions in section?
I'm going to suggest maybe carry on,
Okay.
and we'll take questions at the end, of which I have many.
Okay.
But some of those may need to go into. Could I just ask you also though to clarify? So you talked about the consultation up until November.
Yeah.
So obviously, I think you're aware that we, as Commission, put in a response as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, carry on.
No, absolutely. So so I've reviewed the responses that you provided, so I can expand on some of the suggestions there if that's helpful. I mean, obviously, I think it's important for me to point out that planning policy, we're not leading on biodiversity for the whole borough. We're looking in this at the sorts of through the planning process. So in terms of the range of green interventions or paving that's taken forward, through council schemes, that's not something direct control over. So policies that we have in the Southwark plan and the guidance, it's intended to set out what we expect to see. We're expanding on best practice where we have that, and obviously there's specific biodiversity projects, those often part. In the green infrastructure, biodiversity and trees section, we do include sections on urban greening factor. We explain that we expect applicants to follow the London Plan guidance, which is free for residential or commercial. So that is, and it's not actually adopted in the Southwark Plan, it's something we will adopt, and it's something we expect applicants to follow. We are monitoring this, and it's quite interesting. What we're finding at the moment is on some constrained sites, it can be quite challenging to actually, exceed that target or meet it because of the other policy requirements that we have. So this is something we're going to look very carefully with the review and look at, is it possible to go higher, or is that going to hinder other objective areas such as PV on roofs? So just to give an example, if you've got quite a small site, it's quite constrained, the building is going up to the edge of the site boundary, you've got to incorporate some green space on there for play space, which might that's not going to fall very hardly. There might be limited roof space because you've got ventilation equipment roof. You might need to put some PV on there to meet our quite ambitious energy target. So, we are very much insisting on urban green, but there are cases where it is actually very difficult to target. So we will continue this and let you know how that is looking, and also doing in that regard. In terms of biodiversity net gain, again, this is covered in that SPD. It's quite new legislation, mandatory earlier this year. And actually, it's quite interesting because what we're seeing is that actually the majority of applications are exempt from biodiversity net gain. That is because if you're a householder, you are exempt. There's a minimum habitat area, which means if you have habitat on site that's less than 20%, from biodiversity net gain. So actually, we're not seeing as much BNG, which is secured through mandatory biodiversity net gain legislation in the Environment Act. We're not seeing as much. It's coming through on the major side, but actually what we're finding is developers are being quite careful about how they draw in some cases. So it's beneficial in that it's making developers think harder, so they're not cutting trees, whereas once they might have been trees on site. So actually that, I would say, is the main benefit. It's making developers think harder about the biodiversity on site, because if you cut down trees or you take away biodiversity, your baseline is diminished significantly and you still have to make up the 10%. So actually developers being quite careful about how they're addressing it. And I'm pleased to say that actually having an ecologist in-house actually provide this guidance to applicants, guidance already being meeting with is really beneficial. Schemes as they come, we're helping to design biodiversity into those schemes. So we're already using this guidance as it. Walking and wheeling, as I said, we've got some really useful guidance in there on cycle racks, ensuring that crossings are actually lining up with walking routes. Then we don't want convoluted, walking routes. We want to make the sustainable and healthy choice, easy choice for residents. So that's very much encouraged in here. We're stating to applicants that we expect them to look at PTAL ratings, so that we can actually, really promote that modal shift. In terms of waste management and recycling, there's a number of things in here which we're encouraging applicants to think about, and it includes things like, how can recycling the trees, how can those receptacles be accommodated in like design? How can we have space on balconies, wormeries, things like that. So really trying to incorporate innovative best practice into how we address waste within Southwark, which is obviously vehicle movement is a key contributor to consumption. At the beginning of the section, we have quite a weighty section on energy and sustainability standards. So it talks about things like reducing water use and cooling hierarchy. So that's providing additional guidance. It's worth, as I know you are aware, we are undertaking a review, early review of carbon policies in Southwark, which is something which the inspector asked for. The plan was set. So we're already working on that. So some of this guidance will obviously in time placed once we do that review process. And the reason for the early review also is that the targets are becoming more ambitious over time. So that's where we are with that. There's also section on air quality, and so that's a snapshot really of that SPD. You want me to pause there?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm conscious that I don't know, Charlotte. You may or may not be aware that that it's actually the fourth year that I've chaired this commission, and actually the first year we did a very substantial piece of work on energy, and I actually wanted to raise some questions with you on the energy side, really coming out of that. At that point, we actually had a Botty on the commission who was the CEO of Passive Trust, who provides some really insightful information, and particularly, so I'm very conscious that the feedback that we got during that review was around district heating networks. It was actually very much along the lines that we should not be building at this stage properties which require linking to district heating networks, or if they do, then they should be, sort of possibly, micro localized heating networks. And for me, reading the SPD, the thing that really sort of stood out is that we're sort of still talking in terms of, I don't think it actually mentions cell chip per se, but within the SPD, there is still, repeated reference after reference after reference to linking development to district heating networks, rather than making sure that they don't need those district heating networks in the first place. And that for me was a bit of concern. I think also, we're talking about low carbon. I think there's been lots of information in the public domain recently about municipal waste incinerators, of which cell chip obviously we are closely linked to, and I think there has been sort of an assumption that they're somehow low carbon, and therefore linking up new development to cell chip is somehow a low carbon solution. And I think it's now increasingly clear that it absolutely is anything but that. So I suppose for me, there was a bit of a concern that there was such a heavy emphasis in this document on district heating networks when, again, I don't think there's sort of specific reference. I mean, I think some of the references to the absolute standards adhere quite closely to Passive House standard, but I don't think there is specific reference to Passive House standard. But arguably, we would be pushing for much more development, echoing that trend rather than more of the same on the basis that we can link up with the heating network, which used to be considered for carbon accounting as low carbon, which it just isn't. That was a bit of a long question, but I sort of really appreciate your comments on it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the district heat network issue, the policy in the Southwark plan, which basically sets out that, you know, within a certain area, if there's proximity to a DHN, we need to facilitate that link. So it's certainly not that we're trying to sort of blanket encourage, you know, connection to a DHN where that's not feasible. So we can certainly look at the wording in here if you feel that that's coming through too strongly. It's certainly, you know, the intention that we're trying to sort of encourage everything down that route. We do ask applicants where there is, you know, a planning application, a planning approval for a DHN to basically future-proof in case in the future it's possible to connect up to that, but it's not, you know, not an approach that we're saying, you know, this must happen. In terms of the ambitions around the energy targets, that is very much something that is. So this year, the policy team appointed a consultancy called TUDE to look at energy efficiency and moving to an EUI, energy use target, which looks at the complete energy usage of the building. So currently, Part L of the building regulations, it's only looking at certain elements. So you can't actually measure, you know, in this building, for example, you've got being used by servers, you know, the computing. So using a more holistic approach to measuring carbon emissions is considered to be a better way of ensuring that the buildings which are in game planning approval in Southwark are more carbon efficient. So that's certainly work that we will share with you. There will be a briefing in today. We spoke to Councillor Dennis, and there was a briefing with her on the early review. So, you know, that's something we can do also. We can obviously look at this again, and I mean, are there any other sort of areas that you feel?
I mean, I think so. So I have to say I'm not a technical expert. I just know, having written that review and having taken the evidence from people who are, that was something that sort of really stood out. So, as I say, my intention would be that the Commission will submit a response, but it will be, we say, it will be based on the technical expertise of others rather than say ours. But this, as I say, this. I mean, I was speaking specifically relating to a document that we produced in this commission. I think the only person here, I think Graham may have been on that commission as well. Sorry, Councillor Neil. Yes, so that's. But certainly we can comment on that in the report.
Yeah.
Do members have any other comments on the SPD?
I agree with Councillor. As someone who's been quite vocal about the district works and their usage across our current stock as well, I think it's something that we need to keep bearing in mind, and the efficiency of those of the usage of those is so dependent on others. There's a bigger piece of work that should be done about our existing stock, which I think that this brings in. So it's.
I think it's good context. The SPD itself obviously refers to new developments. Were there other questions members wanted to put forward on the SPD? As I said, I mean, there were many points that came to me. I think it's fair to say, in summary, on the biodiversity side of it, that obviously there is an awful lot of work that we carried out through the biodiversity review and through those recommendations, which I think a lot of which speak directly to this SPD. And I know that sadly one of our courtees who is unable to be here this evening has, really, and both our and the other courtee who is here with us this evening, Simon Saville. So Anna and Simon have both done an awful lot of work, specifically drilling through the biodiversity stuff, and obviously there's good and there's stuff that we feel that there should be improved, and that, as I say, is largely already dealt with in the existing biodiversity review that we've carried out. There were other things that, to me, that came out. So, for example, so that was in the householder. Yes. So I think it's fair to say on the climate and environment SPD, there's a lot of the work that we have already carried out that will inform the response. But thank you very much. Do you want to talk a little bit about the householder SPD as well?
Yeah, I can do, and clarify briefly on the PHN. I mean, I think the sort of problem we're in at the moment is we're sort of caught between, obviously, Public Plan 2022, it's policy P70, was that PHN. We can't write in additional policy into this. We've got to wait for the sub to, obviously, or the early review, it will be carbon policy to date that and to end that policy essentially. But at the moment, obviously, writing guidance for existing. So we're just sort of, it's not perfect at the moment. Obviously, just to reassure you.
Understood. Thank you very much. Yeah, if you want to, so were there any further questions on the Councillor Emmanuel?
Mentioned something about worms.
Yeah.
My imagination is just going as a thought of, because we've got in front of the worms are this long, they're not little tiny little long things.
Yeah, I mean, we're just in the SPD, we're trying to encourage ways of dealing with waste. So, one element of best practice is for people who want to have a wormery, you can get them of a certain size that will fit in balconies if they want to have that. It's not garden, but it may not be for everyone. Obviously, we're trying to put the ideas out there.
It's something that Councillor Emmanuel thinks too many. If there are no further questions specifically for the climate and environment SPD, can you move on to the householder?
Yeah, that's fine.
SPD then. Thank you very much.
So the householder SPD is essentially aimed at homeowners or people that rent a home, and really it's to guide the improvement and adaptation of it, and to try and ensure that there's a high standard of housing, and that when people are looking to refurbish their home, they can consider a range of factors, so including obviously energy demand, carbon emissions, and adaptation measures. It tries to promote obviously a whole buildings approach, so the idea that obviously if people are considering alterations or adaptations, there's other things that happen perhaps whilst they're doing it themselves, or they've got a workman on site. So elements that we look at include draft proofing, how to isolate your home, the energy hierarchy, energy solutions which they could consider, like for example. We also talk about heritage in here, so factors that if you live in a listed building, it's not always straightforward to make those adaptations. So there's some quite clear guidance in there about factors to consider around windows, visibility of solar panels, and how to deal with tension, etc. So this is really aimed. It's written in plain English so that householders and members that can understand the guidance. It's not a very sort of heavy, technical piece of guidance. Some people want that, but there is already lots of technical guidance out there. So it's deliberately written in a way. It also deals with electric charging points for vehicles, how to manage crossovers, off-street parking, cycle and bin storage. So there's a range of practical measures in there. The comments that we've had are generally supportive. There's a couple of points of clarification that people asked for, which obviously we will address through our response to consultation comments. There's not basement extensions are covered in there, so it's very, I'd say it's a more specific and focused SPD. The remit of this is narrower than for the climate environment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Emmanuel, did you have? No, sorry. I was going to sort of kick off also again, sort of having gone through it. I think there are a number of areas which do overlap, certainly with the piece of work that we've done on biodiversity, particularly. One thing that really sprung to mind was about off-street parking. So the biodiversity review, actually, I presented to Cabinet today. There are 33 recommendations in it, and there are a number of those which were around off-street parking. And in a way, so I appreciate, obviously, those have just been formally submitted, but I think there were lots of things. So, for example, something which stuck out to me in the householder SPD was it still talks about the minimum depth of a front garden as being 4.8 metres. And if you have a front garden which is 4.8 metres deep, then you would be, all other things being equal, given permission to put in a vehicle footway crossover. When we know at this moment in time, there are many cars that are longer than 5 metres. And we know of cases where you will see a pavement where people have had historically installed vehicle footway crossovers, and sometimes quite narrow pavements, and you'll have a vehicle sticking out, 50 centimetres sometimes at the end of it. So I suppose for me, that was sort of, if we are updating the guidance, it seems at the very least we should be looking to update that guidance in terms of, given the fact that vehicles have got so much bigger. The recommendation in the biodiversity review was that there should be a minimum of 6 metres, actually, because even if you say, well, okay, so there are plenty of cars now which are greater than 5 metre steps, but you need a bit of space to leave between your vehicle and your house, and hopefully, a little bit of manoeuvring space as well. So there was, things like that. I felt that it was, there was a tendency to sort of repeat what we already have, rather than bringing in what was actually genuinely updated guidance. I mean, I don't know. Sorry, Councillor Neil.
If I may, maybe we could ask how long has the land been keeping up with clients, keeping it at? If it's been 10 years or 20 years, 30 years, from a commonsensical perspective, to move the cars, move with the times.
Yeah, I mean, so sorry. I'm just conscious that I'm sort of commenting rather than. Yes, exactly. So I mean, do you know how long it's been 4.8?
I would need to speak
to
transport and see where that figure originates from. I mean, so there were a few things around there again which very, very strongly covered in biodiversity review. I was going to ask also something which I didn't see in the householder SPD, which I have actually already. That's unsurprisingly mown my views out to officers for several years now, and also on the fact that it's still not there. But it seems as if we ought to be addressing growing numbers of applications for domestic air conditioning. Do you think that there would be a way of including something on that in the SPD and effectively sort of discouraging it as default? It would depend on how that's classified under development right. So I can feed back to you on that. I think obviously where there's heritage considerations, it can be easier to affect the built fabric, but there are instances where it's very can't do anything about that. So, but
Thank you, Councillor Neal.
On drawing my attention to the landing, and the wording is that it would permeable. It doesn't. I think that the language more strongly either follow it rather than taking over each person. Maybe that.
I mean, yes. So absolutely, Councillor Neal. I think that's to be. I mean, I think that certainly will be something that we can put a commission to in response to do the consultation on the SPD. It is very, very well covered in the recommendations. And it absolutely, and the actual thing that was interesting was that the recommendations that we put forward under the biodiversity review were shown to officers across departments, but certainly so the flood risk management team really actually suggested that actually you could go a lot further with this, and I think that also then so on flood risk, and I appreciate as you say it's an SPD, so this isn't formulation, but obviously it's not sort of necessarily possible for us to sort of change policy on it, but I'm conscious obviously there's basements, there are the hard standings, and there's a sense that householders can put in all sorts of changes that can dramatically affect or dramatically increase flood risk. And then the council ends up having to cover the costs of the risks of the problems that arise in the public domain. I don't know if you think there's anything more that we could be doing to actually sort of redress that balance, because we have a document here which basically takes for granted that householders can do all these things, but that inevitably means that someone else, and the council or something else which is funded by publicly funded, has to address the damage that's caused. I suppose it's sort of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I appreciate that it's
If I may,
probably a little bit more.
Chair, in so many of these sort of environmental aspects, the individual is externalised. Just another somebody doing freedom of choice, but somebody else is picking up the picking up.
Yes,
I mean, thank you. Sorry. No, I mean it's interesting discussion. I think there are a number of things that we do already. So there's a section in here of the basements. So we do require that has to actually be understood, like who would look at that in ground conditions. We also have there's a policy framework it's dictated by the government, in fact. So there has to be a sequential for major development sites in Southwark. So that already happens. So they look at the flood risk, for major sites. So does it meet certain tests? So the issue with Southwark is that actually most of the north of the borough is in flood zone 2 and 3. We can't avoid that. We just wouldn't be able to build anything. So the sequential test looks at, are you in flood risk 1? There isn't much flood risk. There isn't any flood risk. You automatically then move down to flood risk 2. But you look at the safest areas and you look at how you take flood risk on that side. So in terms of what we do in testing planning applications, so that framework is really robust, and we actually have two planning officers that come in from the every month to help case officers assess flood risk practice. So I think that, that's really good. That's something that we can do through our ongoing discussion with the Environment Agency, because we take this very seriously. I've answered the question about basement impacts. That's something that's taken very seriously also. I think there's obviously the wider flood risk issues in Southwark. You might be aware that the Environment Agency are asking every London borough to attend riverside strategies. Southwark will need to produce one of these. And actually, our safety in Southwark depends on flood defence condition of potential. So that is something that the Environment Agency are monitoring. They're looking at that. Responsibility for the maintenance of actually falls on the landowner. So I don't know if you along the foreshore at low tide, buildings are actually built on top of buildings. So that is something that the council as a whole will be looking at and are looking at. The climate looking at that impact. So we will be engaging with the EA. So I think in terms of going from a really sort of micro level, on an individual application level up to sort of very strategic level, we certainly take that very, very seriously. The section in the SPD does talk about measures such as flood resilience design, raising floor levels, thinking about things like escape routes in the event of a flood, because the lifespan of our buildings, we're looking at, beyond 100 years. So, the levels of the rainfall will increase. So, I'd welcome you to, that section. We've also integrated that with SUD, so we are looking at, the factors you've raised. So, permeable paving, rain gardens. How can we integrate drainage and slow down that flow of water, starting with the surface water flood issue, because that's the other risk. Lots of the sort of elephant castle area in critical drainage areas. So, these design factors. But it is, the technology is moving on all the time. Certainly these SPDs are intended to update. I think we've got new policies coming through from the next sort of review. Certainly these SPDs will be updated with the.
Thank you very much. Do members have any further questions, issues that they would like to raise? Thank you so much. Thank you. And that was really, really useful. And it was. Thank you very much for your presentation. And you. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
So, moving on to agenda item number 9, which was the Cabinet response to the Sustainable Freight Review. The report was enclosed in the agenda. I'm trying to think. I think it's probably only Councillor Neil who was involved, and possibly Councillor Kapula as well was involved in the Commission during that review. All our recommendations were accepted, except one which was partially accepted for very understandable reasons. It covered something which was not within the remit of freight. So just to note that report, we also, as agenda item number 10, the final biodiversity scrutiny review is enclosed. As I presented that to Cabinet today. It's in all its 66 pages and 33 recommendations, which, as I've said, a lot of that will address some of the issues in the 2 SPDs that we looked at this evening. So are there any comments on agenda item number 10, the biodiversity scrutiny review, in which case we will note that. Agenda item number 11 is the work programme. The only comment that I am going to make on that is that I'm going to add to the work programme that we have. I want to hear from, if possible, from Thames Water, because I am very conscious, and I think certainly in my ward and I'm sure throughout the borough, that there is a big problem with damaged infrastructure, which when repairs are finally made, typically the reinstatement of the public realm is extremely poor. And that's really the perspective from which I was wanting to look at it, rather than from the perspective of the flooding and the water wastage itself, although that also is, of course, an issue. Did any members have any other comments on the work programme? In which case, I'll take that as a no. Thank you very much, and good night, and have a lovely evening. Thank you.